well, welcome everybody to our First Corinthians leader videos. My name is Carolyn Jones.
And I'm Trey Corey. We're grateful to get to jump back in with you guys this semester.
Yeah, we are. We're so grateful for you guys as leaders. We know that you've said yes to something that's can be a challenge, and we just know that the Lord is going to use your life and what you bring to the table. But more importantly than that, we just want to remind you kind of what these groups are all about and kind of why we're here.
Yeah, I'll just tell you, I think the role that you guys get to have is probably one of my favorite ever. I love that you guys get to be a guide for people as they discover truth for themselves. So you're not a master teacher that has to have all the answers, that ultimately you're a facilitator, guiding them along the way to help them kind of discover truth and really to be able to open the Word and hopefully develop a deeper love for the Word, a deeper understanding of the Word for themselves. And ultimately, one of your greatest tools on your tool belt, we'll talk about this as we go, is just asking good questions. Yeah. Not having to have all the answers, but asking good questions and really pulling them out and helping them engage and getting to study the Word.
Yeah, I love that. I think of a group as this really great integration between God's Word, God's people, and God's Spirit. And we just show up to the table and He blesses and multiplies. So we're excited. All right, so we're going to take a look at our First Corinthians packet.
It's a bit of a long book.
Yeah, it's long. So one of the things that you might do as you begin is to just look at the table of contents with your group and just kind of that first night, you're going to be meeting and greeting. You're going to be, passing out books. You're going to be making sure everybody knows each other's names. But as you think about introducing them to the First Corinthians study itself, it might not be a bad idea to look at that contents page and just say, hey, First Corinthians is a 16-chapter book. And normally in our Bible studies, we do go verse by verse. But what we're going to be doing in this study is actually taking some longer chunks, reading the whole of that chunk, but then doing more of an observation on a key section within that longer section. So as you just look through the scriptures there, you'll see that they're pretty long, but don't be afraid. We're gonna focus in on a smaller section. So you might just let your group know that. And then turning the page to the welcome section. Again, you'll know the people in your group, but some of them may be brand new, never have studied before, and they're looking at this with big eyes. And you might just break it down easily. You're going to say, we are here to connect, grow, and engage. We're here to connect relationally, grow biblically, and then engage missionally out in the world with what we are learning here. And then you get out what you put in, and so just really encouraging people to just try interacting with the contents. We have a lot in our packet, but it's just a suggestion for them to not get all the right answers or do everything that's suggested, but to just interact with it as they feel led. So going over observe, interpret, apply. We in every section we look at what do we see there, what does it mean, and then how does it work? What can we do as a result in obedience? But most of all, I would really encourage you to just let your group know that relying on the Spirit, and the Spirit is so prevalent in 1 Corinthians. We're not going to be able to get away from the Spirit. And so we might as well all the time as we're studying on our own and as we're together, be prayerful and be relying on His power to illuminate His Word to us. So yeah, that's a great way to get started.
And ultimately, I think as we think about small groups, we think about a packet like this, we wholeheartedly believe that some of the most significant and deepest enduring life change happens within a small group environment. And so you're getting to kind of help foster that environment, help creating those moments. And so who knows where people are coming from their first night as they kind of jump in, but the opportunity for what God can do and the Spirit can do over the course of the semester in this environment that's interactive, that's communal, that has pieces and elements that Sunday morning church services don't. And so you get to help facilitate that. You get to help kind of embark them on that journey. And so we're excited to help kind of coach you, help provide resourcing to you along the way. And we'll be here week in, week out with you guys too. So let's talk survey. So survey is kind of where we typically start with these studies as we kind of try to get our hands around the whole of a book. And normally some of these books are 4 chapters, but this one's 16. So I hope your arms can stretch, and we're going to try to kind of help you along that way. But kind of walk us through survey. In general, what are we trying to do with survey? What do we expect out of survey?
Yeah, so typically we would ask people to get into the word right away, that we want them to read the whole before they look at the parts. That's basically the big idea of surveys. You want to look at the whole before you look at the details. So what we're going to do right now is Trey's going to kind of go over a little bit of the background, kind of some of the cultural pieces, and then I'm going to guide you through what I think you could do with your group that very first night in terms of getting into the text itself.
And so even as you look at your packet here with survey, we actually included the first 17 verses of the book. And we did that because we felt like the opening verses not just kind of give you who's writing the letter, who's Paul writing the letter to, but also in some of the early themes that are introduced, even those first 17 verses, you get a lot of the big ideas, a lot of even the occasion for why the book is being written. And so we felt like we don't normally do it this way, but we felt like especially with a long book, but particularly with this book, getting those first few verses as a part of the survey would really help you introduce why is Paul writing this book? Why is this book even being written? What are the issues at play that Paul is wanting to address as he addresses this church in a particular locale? So let's kind of talk through a little bit of who's writing and who is he writing to. So we know the book is written by Paul. Even verse 1, Paul called as an apostle of Jesus Christ by the will of God. And so you get a sense from the very beginning that this book is written by Paul. We have background knowing a lot of Paul's interactions with the church. In fact, we know this actually isn't the first letter he's written to them. So we call it 1 Corinthians because the very first letter we don't have actually our hands on. And so in some ways, this is the second letter to the Corinthians, but it's the first that we have. So we call it 1 Corinthians. And really, as Paul's writing, he's writing to a church that's really located in a unique spot, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But we know with two letters that also but this particular letter has really been prompted by a couple communications that Paul has received about the situation that's going on there at the church. Particularly, he's going to receive communication from a person named Chloe, who's going to tell him about some of the divisions and some of the lack of discipline that's going on in the church. And that prompting that by which he writes is going to really kind of capture the first 6 chapters of the book. The disorders that existed in the church and really the lack of discipline, particularly with sexual immorality that exists within the church. But then chapter 7 and on and the rest of the book are really kind of a different feel and a different genre, because he's going to kind of go one topic after another that have all been introduced to him through other writings, and people are asking him questions. And so he's in a sense responding by those promptings to answer the questions that are being presented to him. So you kind of get divisions and disorder, divisions and lack of discipline in the first 6 chapters. And then the remaining chapter 17 all the way through 16, you get a sense of one issue after another. And what's going to be really fun is a lot of these issues that were present for that local church a long time ago are still topics and issues that we're talking about today in our local church, and particularly within our culture today.
Yeah, for sure. What I also kind of hit me was how really close to the resurrection these things were happening. Literally 20 years after Jesus died and was resurrected and ascended, were these things happening. Paul was going to Corinth. And so just how fresh and new the movement of Jesus, Christianity is.
So a little more background. Verse 2, to the church of God, which is at Corinth. Usually in these opening salutations, we don't sometimes get too bogged down, but I think it's really fascinating by the way that Paul kind of addresses it to the church that is in Corinth. And really those two ideas, I think, are going to dominate a lot of the book. We're going to kind of give you, even here in survey, a little bit of what we know about Corinth, because a lot of the culture, a lot of the background of that city was really impactful upon the church and had frankly crept in and invaded the church in some ways that Paul is going to try to walk them back out of. And so we're going to talk to you a little bit about the church, then a little bit about Corinth as well. So let's talk about Corinth. So where was Corinth? We know Corinth, location-wise, was just southwest of the Isthmus of Corinth. And so this was a location that connected northern Greece to southern Greece that you could travel through by land or by sea. And so it really was, in many ways, geographically, it became, therefore, a commerce and a trade center. And so you had people, different cultures, people traveling all the time. And because you had all of this trade and movement, you didn't just have a wide variety of people, but you also had a lot of affluence and a lot of wealth that was coming through this area. So this is a wealthy area, as a center of trade and commerce. You had multiple cultures passing through. You had lots of travel. It was a center point, geographically speaking. But then also we know from some things we're going to see in here as well, that alongside of that wealth and affluence, you also had some very unique things happening religiously. You had the Temple of Aphrodite, where you had hundreds of temple prostitutes. And so you had this real sexual kind of ethic that was within the city that was very different. And then what we're going to see is the church had not remained separate from that ethic, but had really, in many ways, incorporated some of the thought processes, some of the activities and behaviors, and they were no longer separate from the city and separate from the culture, but had really integrated in. And so what we're going to see kind of as Paul addresses the church, he's going to talk through that there were some divisions among the church. And those divisions were not just kind of party factions, but they were built off of a evaluation and a esteem of knowledge and wisdom in a way that that knowledge was captured by particular philosophers or particular voices or leaders, and people would gravitate to those people. And so you had a fracturing of the church in divisions based off of allegiances to people and the way that they would communicate, the way they would teach, or the wisdom they would bring forward. You also had all kinds of lack of discipline. So we're going to see kind of sexual stuff that was going on, and a lack of discipline with how they carried their bodies, how they carried their thought processes, how they carried their worldview. And then lastly, we're going to see kind of, as we said, just a series of issues from marriage to lawsuits to spiritual gifts to church service, and all across the board as to a lot of the things that the city had brought issues up within the church, and they were grappling with how does our theology impact our conduct? How does what we believe impact how we live? And so I think one of the things that's really fun about this book is you're going to see theology and practice and really kind of theology and culture intertwined in a way. You're going to see theology at work. You're going to see Paul kind of navigate through these cultural customs, and you kind of see these things in a way in which the church was living within the city, grappling with the city, in some ways being invaded by the city in ways that they should not have been. And so we're going to kind of see Paul call them toward a uniqueness and holiness, but also call them toward an engagement at the same time. So we're going to kind of parse through that as we walk through the book.
So good. One of the things that strikes me as well is just the style of the writing. Paul meets them right where they're at. If they are in a culture that values the rhetorical, the eloquent, the wisdom, the philosophy. So much of philosophy that we study now comes from this era, and yet he meets them with rhetorical arguments and his eloquent writing. So one thing that we need to kind of remember is that a lot of times in the letter, there'll be Paul using slogans from the culture that he is either repeating what they've heard or what they've said, and sometimes that gets a little tricky. So we'll be leading you through that a little bit and giving you various ways to look at those things. But the other big thing about the culture, I think, too, is what's in the packet here is the honor-shame culture. So it's really tied together with philosophy and in an interesting way, because what they honor is the highest value. So we value money. Of course, they probably valued money as well, but they valued honor. And so they had this big difference between honor and shame. So anything that you did to raise your honor was good. And rhetorical speech and wisdom was a big way for people to gain honor in their culture. So as this new message of the upside down kingdom comes to them, they're grappling and trying to understand how going low, how embracing the cross can be integrated or understood even in this honor and shame culture.
That's awesome. So our hope for you guys as you're walking through survey, we recognize as everyone's walking in that first night, they probably haven't necessarily read the book yet. And so what you're wanting them to do is be able to kind of give them a sense of just some of the big ideas, some of the themes. What are some of the things that were going on within the city that the church would have had to kind of deal with and grapple with, so that by the time we get into next week into chapter 1, they kind of have a running start to it and they have a chance. And then I would also encourage them, read through the book in the
Yeah.
upcoming week.
Yeah.
Get in the text. And so one of the things I want to throw to you, because here we are at the beginning of a semester.
Yeah.
My kids just went back to school. First day of school, syllabus shock. And I
Yeah.
think looking at the outline of Corinthians, you can have a little bit of syllabus shock of,
Yeah.
oh gosh. And then the question is, does the teacher begin to lecture in
Yeah.
the first class
Yeah.
session? So
Yeah.
help me as we're thinking through for our leaders, first night,
Mm-hmm.
we just met each other. What are goals for the first night?
Yeah.
Should we be getting into the text? How do we navigate all the
Yeah.
kind of beginnings?
Yeah. Those are such great questions. And I feel like, one of the things I think that helps people feel at ease is if they actually have something to do together. And so that is another reason why we put these first 17 verses in here with the 4 questions to give you actually a little bit of a Bible study moment in that first week. So depending on all the other pieces that you have going on, I would say you could actually talk through a little bit maybe of the background that you've gleaned from this video, but also things you've read. I highly encourage you to read Acts chapter 18, which gives the whole flow of Paul's time in Corinth. But then I would suggest that you say, hey, let's turn in our books to page 10 and actually read through, share around the table, have 2 people read it or 3 or 4 people read these first 17 verses. And then just do a simple thing asking, these 4 questions. How would you describe Paul's relationship? What does it seem like how he's interacting with these people? What's the tone here? Do you notice, some type of emotion underneath what he's saying? And then mainly questions 3 and 4, I think, is where you could really spend some time. And that is, how would you describe the church in Corinth? Even based on this, there's so much rich information here. In the first 10 verses, we learn that they are truly a church. They're called out ones. So there's some rich things that you could talk about there. But then you could also learn how they're unhealthy. In verse 10, we get the punch. I want you to be united. I've heard about these quarrels among you. And then I love question 4, where you could even say, what are the themes or big ideas from this section? Because as Trey said, we will find them in the rest of the book as well. And then asking, how do you see these same things happening in the modern church? Asking, how do you see these things happening in our church? Those are some just getting from the big kind of idea of the historical, bringing it up to the present. I think you could do a couple of things like that. And then ending this time, even with a simple question, what are you looking forward to in our study of 1 Corinthians? What is it about studying this book that drew you to sign up for this group? I think that's always a great idea to kind of you might have some person say, well, I've actually never studied the Bible before. I'm all brand new to this, and that's great information for you. Or you may have someone say, I've read this several times, but I'm looking forward to seeing how it interacts with our current and modern culture today in 2024.
Yeah, I think getting them to being able to share kind of why did they sign up? Why are they here? Some of them may know a lot of people. Some of them may have not known anyone, and they show up for the first time. And so getting a sense of maybe not just what they're looking for, but I also think you get a moment here as the first night wraps up to even just ask some opening questions about their spiritual background.
Yeah.
So is this their first study ever at Grace? Is this their first, how long have they been at Grace? And then you're trying to get to that place where a little bit further, even to kind of get a sense of what's their spiritual background? Have they trusted Jesus before? And so one of the things kind of I can talk with you a little bit about here is kind of the way that we've shared the gospel in the packet, because I think that first night, probably with your own testimony, you're going to share as a leader your testimony of how you trusted Jesus Christ. What was your life like before Christ? What is it you believed when you trusted Christ about his death, burial, and resurrection? And then ultimately, how's your life changed having believed in Jesus? And so by you beginning to share your testimony, it also sets the stage to kind of begin to get a sense of what is everyone else's story. And so you're not going to get everyone's story that first night, but you want to begin to open the door to get a sense of not just why they're here, why do they sign up, what's their felt need, but also kind of where are they coming from spiritually.
Yeah. So good. You could even point out page 8 that has just our overview of what is the gospel. I was telling Trey, I just love this first sentence that says, the gospel is the good news of how we can be reconciled to God through Jesus. It's the simple message. And it's so critical because actually the next lesson starts off with the power of the gospel. The gospel is all through 1 Corinthians. So, yeah, setting the stage the first night is going to be your fun adventure. And we're here for you guys. So, thanks for being with us. And we look forward to our next lesson.
We're excited for you guys, and we'll be praying for y'all as y'all kick off.